Welcome again to the Get More Sports College Basketball Podcast. It's the last show of the regular season as we look ahead to the Final Four, where the 38-0 Kentucky Wildcats take on Big Ten champion Wisconsin in last year's Final Four rematch. And on the other side, 33-4 Duke Blue Devils take on Big Ten runner-up Michigan State in Saturday's other semifinal. So to get into it, I'm your host, Michael Krumholtz, joined now by the president and founding father of the Bronson Koenig fan club, William Whalen. How are you today, Will?
Bronson is indeed the greatest man that I think this country has ever produced. The great state of Wisconsin should be quite proud. Simply, I think it should be known that Bronson Koenig is greater than any man the state of Ohio has ever produced.
Well, that's very debatable. And we could spend an entire podcast talking about that. And we just might. Now that we're getting into the off-season, we just might spend an entire podcast talking about that. But no, Bronson Koenig, we'll certainly get into talking about Koenig as he figures to be a major factor going up against the Harrison twin and Kentucky's other guards on Saturday. So, speaking of Kentucky, listen, all we're hearing going into Saturday is that it's going to be Kentucky versus Duke. That it's a foregone conclusion. It's got to be Kentucky versus Duke, that neither of these Big Ten teams have a real shot. And so we know that means both Wisconsin and Michigan State definitely have a shot. Will it be a Big Ten title game rematch? I don't know. I'm not ready to go that far. But even looking back at last week, all we heard was Kentucky's going to wipe the floor with Notre Dame. Notre Dame's too small. And really, they just as easily could have lost that game. With Wisconsin, we heard all the experts take Arizona over Wisconsin. And really, the Badgers, in those closing minutes, the Badgers didn't even really make it close. I mean, they kind of took it to Arizona. So we'll get into our picks. But how we're going to do this show, this Final Four edition of the show, quite simply, we're going to go deep into both games and talk matchups, and the big question marks for all four teams entering Saturday. First, before we dive into the Wisconsin-Kentucky matchups, I want to get a real quick set of rankings from you as to where the other teams rank, Will, in terms of their likelihood to beat Kentucky. So from 1 to 3 with Wisconsin, Duke, and Michigan State, where do you rank these teams likely to end Kentucky's undefeated streak?
You know, I would put Duke probably at number 1, just because for a number of reasons, but mainly because of their guard play, and I think that's something that we're going to talk about today regarding Kentucky and Wisconsin and kind of the formula that Notre Dame produced to hang with Kentucky and have a chance to beat them. Wisconsin would certainly be second. They've got the size, and really what makes their size different is that their size is extremely skilled and can take Kentucky's size outside the paint. Certainly with Willie Cauley-Stein, he's comfortable with that, but I do think that their size and skill around the court with Hayes, Kaminsky, and of course Decker presents some problems. Michigan State would come in third just because they don't have incredible size underneath. I mean, somebody like Gavin Schilling certainly can compete. Brandon Dawson can compete. But I don't believe that they have the size or second guard that can really give Kentucky a bunch of problems. Certainly, Travis Trice is electric and can go off at any given time, but ultimately it comes down to whether or not they have enough guard play, enough depth, both inside and out, to really spread Kentucky out and then have enough inside to kind of compete like August did for Notre Dame. I don't see that from Michigan State, so that's how I would go 1 through 3 in terms of these teams.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the general consensus, is that Duke really presents the biggest threat to ending Kentucky's national title hopes. But Wisconsin could give them a game. Let's see with the matchups. Sam Decker has been playing as well as anyone in the tournament. Frank Kaminsky did his usual thing against Arizona. So we'll see. Let's dive head on into this game now between Kentucky and Wisconsin. As we said, a rematch of last year's Final Four, where Aaron Harrison did what Aaron Harrison does, made a clutch 3 to get the 1-point victory for the Cats. It's kind of a weird tournament for Wisconsin, as this is the third team they'll play that they played in last year's tournament as well, with the other two being Oregon and Arizona. And as we know, Wisconsin is virtually the same team with the same pieces. However, Kentucky is not. And it's especially important to note that Willie Cauley-Stein did not play in that game last year, did not guard Frank Kaminsky as he was injured earlier in the tournament. Now he goes into the game figuring to match up against Kaminsky as the nation's best post defender goes up against probably the best interior offensive player in the country. So quite simply, Will, looking at Kaminsky and Willie Cauley-Stein going head-to-head, who wins this matchup? Will Kaminsky have a huge game like he did against Arizona, or will Cauley-Stein kind of be able to hold him to a so-so game like Kaminsky had in his previous 2 tournament games?
I actually think this is fascinating because I think Kentucky would be well served to go even bigger and have Anthony Towns and Willie Cauley-Stein on the court at the same time so that Cauley-Stein can guard Decker and so that Towns can guard Kaminsky inside. Because obviously I think, like you said, Willie Cauley-Stein is the best, I think the best defender in America, but particularly the best post defender. But Frank Kaminsky, that's probably the weakest part of his game, in my opinion, and that's not to say that it's a weak part of his game, but he's so strong in the mid-range and the perimeter at the high post that I feel like really what you want to do is put up a guy that can kind of neutralize a little bit his post offense, but also you do not want to have to put a guy like Trey Lyles on Sam Decker because Sam Decker can eat him alive. Really, that's what I question in this matchup is if Willie Cauley-Stein goes head-to-head against Frank Kaminsky, I think Kaminsky's going to have a really tough go of things. Because, as you said again, Willie Cauley-Stein's the best defender in America, particularly in the post. And it's not like he's uncomfortable going out to guard Kaminsky when Kaminsky steps out to 3. So, and I don't think Kaminsky's going to get away with his kind of methodical dribble drive spin move against Willie Cauley-Stein. Willie Cauley-Stein's going to send that 10 rows into the audience. I think that matchup would favor Kentucky, I really do. But it leaves open other matchups that I'm not sure favor Kentucky. But just for those 2, I'd give the edge to Kentucky without a doubt.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Cauley-Stein is very adept at coming out to the perimeter. I mean, against Notre Dame, he makes the play of the game where he blocks Grant's 3.
It was unreal. It was unreal.
His athleticism is superb. I mean, that's why he's figures to go high in the NBA draft. So it's going to be interesting because, people figure Kaminsky can spread Kentucky's defense out and the other guys on Wisconsin as well can spread Kentucky out a la what Notre Dame did. But I agree. Willie Cauley-Stein figures to be a good matchup defensively for Kaminsky, so we'll see how well Frank the Tank does in that one. Another matchup you alluded to, which I think may be the most intriguing one of the game, is Sam Decker. Sam Decker is a matchup problem for anyone. Obviously, it's going to be hard to reproduce what he did against Arizona, considering he didn't miss a shot in the second half. He topped his career high in points for the second straight game. This is the guy, even more so than Kaminsky, I think, that clearly Kentucky's going to key on. They already know Willie Cauley-Stein is probably going to guard Kaminsky. They already know they have the size to guard Kaminsky. But it's Sam Decker that I think Calipari's really going to focus on. He's really preparing for. And remember about Kentucky. They lost Alex Poitras early in the season, and now they don't have that wing defender that's really tall enough or quick enough. I mean, you mentioned if you put Trey Lyles, is he quick enough to hang with Decker? Probably not. So, how will Kentucky defend Decker, and what kind of game do you see Decker ultimately having?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think Kentucky's going to go big. Against Notre Dame, they start both Cauley-Stein and Towns together. I do think they'll do that again against Wisconsin because that also allows Trey Lyles to guard Nigel Hayes. Now, that's not exactly a great matchup for Lyles defensively, but certainly better than Decker. If he had to guard Decker, I really don't think he'd be in good shape. So I think that Lyles against Hayes, and then you put Willie Cauley-Stein defending Sam Decker, I think that's the most advantageous defensive matchup arrangement that Kentucky can have in this game. Because that allows you, then you're talking about the Harrison twins really taking on Wisconsin's perimeter of Gasser and, of course, Koenig. That's not exactly dynamic offensively. Kenny can certainly knock down shots, but they're not going to be breaking you down off the dribble all night. So I think that would actually present Kentucky into a space where they're really comfortable. They'll be able to switch screens 1 through 4, most likely, maybe even 1 through 5. And I do think that would put them in a good position. The question I have is when Willie Cauley-Stein goes out of the game, who is going to guard Decker? Because either Marcus Lee is going to have to get a lot of minutes because he's athletic enough to do it. I don't know that he's intelligent in terms of basketball IQ, staying out of foul trouble, keeping up with Decker enough to do it, but I think he's athletic enough to do it. Zachary Johnson certainly can't guard him at all in no way, shape, or form. The other question would be, do you give up size in favor of putting Devin Booker on him? Because Devin Booker is going to play a lot of minutes. Right? He comes off the bench, but again, one of the better shooting guards in America, and he's 6'6". He's only 3 inches shorter than Sam Decker. Do you give up that size to put a more capable defender on Decker when you bring your big man out? And then put somebody like, Anthony Towns on Nigel Hayes or something like that. I think those are the matchups that Kentucky is going to have to experiment with and kind of choose which one they want to commit to. Because I completely agree with you. Sam Decker is the most important matchup in this game for Kentucky. Now, for all we know, Sam Decker could, he rode a hot streak in here, as you said, career high in points, and he could have a total flop this game, and we end up looking silly because it wasn't important at all. But if Kentucky, you don't want to take that chance. Because when Decker goes off, I think without a doubt Wisconsin is the second best team in the country, and it's not close. When he goes off, they become so unreal dynamic in the open court because he can make you pay. And that plays into a good matchup with Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, it is a sight to see when Decker is on fire. I mean, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson is one of the better defenders in the country. And you figured going into that game that would be a good matchup for Arizona. Decker, just took him to school, just played brilliantly in that game. But to me, if Wisconsin's going to win, I think that Bronson Koenig has to be huge as well. He was brilliant in the Big Ten tournament, but he's really been quiet so far in the NCAA tournament. Against TJ McConnell in Arizona, Koenig only took 1 shot. He had 6 points, but only took 1 shot. And, of course, you can say, well, why would he take a shot when Kaminsky and Decker are on fire, when they're shooting the way they are? But still, Kentucky's athleticism and length on the perimeter could really give Koenig problems. Will, this is your guy. Tell me why he's going to step his game up against the Harrison twins and then the Booker and Ulis combo.
I think if he is going to, it's going to be because the Harrison twins, I'm not sold on them defensively. Or even athletically, really. Certainly they have length, they have size, they can contest shots that he puts up on the perimeter. But the reason why I have him performing well in this game is because when the Harrison twins are on him, and they have to pay a little bit more attention to the likes of Kaminsky, maybe they go over to double Decker or something like that. That leaves Bronson Koenig wide open, and if they come out to contest, if they come out to close out, he does have the craftiness to pump fake them, take 1 dribble in, and either knock down that elbow jumper, or if a big man steps up, dish it down to a forward, kick it to a wing for another forward. I think that this is not going to be a high-scoring Bronson Koenig affair. I really don't think it's going to be like that. But I think it's going to be a game where he knocks down a couple threes, maybe knocks down a jumper, gets out into transition, maybe gets a layup, and has 4 or 5 assists, maybe 1 turnover. I think this is going to be the Bronson Koenig that plays within himself, that sets his guys up, and that really controls with Wisconsin's offense in a positive way. I really do believe that. But I think what's also going to be interesting is if he's poor. If he plays kind of at the level that he has been playing recently, does Travion Jackson, does he play a role in this game? Because he gets 9 minutes against North Carolina, 7 minutes against Arizona. It's clear that Bo Ryan isn't completely ready to trust him, but Travion Jackson's been saying in the media that he's ready to play more. He's ready for more minutes. And if Koenig is not dynamic, you can bring Jackson in, and he gives you a bit more athleticism, a bit more dynamic potential at that position. So I do like Wisconsin's point guard matchup here with Kentucky. In fact, I kind of have it as the most favorable matchup in this game for Wisconsin overall.
Wow, okay. Yeah, you make a good point with Travion Jackson. It'll be his third game back, so we don't know if he's 100% healthy. I mean, he's looked okay in the 2 games he has been back. But also guys like Showalter and Gasser have been giving great minutes to Bo Ryan's club, have been making big shots, big steals, just timely plays around Koenig to really help him out. Now, on Kentucky's end of the floor, I want to talk about a player who deserves a lot of attention, and that's Karl-Anthony Towns, a guy who I think ultimately, when it's all said and done, will probably be the Final Four MVP. But he's a problem for anyone, just like Decker. As he showed against Notre Dame, Wisconsin certainly has the size to match Kentucky, but they're not especially intimidating on defense inside. I doubt Kaminsky will be charged with taking on Karl-Anthony Towns all that much, just for fear of foul trouble. I think a lot of it may go to Duke Dukin, or maybe you slide Nigel Hayes down to help. But Will, how does Kentucky match Towns? And just in general, are you worried about Wisconsin defensively inside against Kentucky? Because, we mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns, but that's not to mention Trey Lyles or Dakari Johnson as well.
I am. I really am, because I'm not worried about who Gasser guards. I mean, certainly Harrison Twin can go off on him and you tip your hat. I'm not entirely worried about who Hayes guards if he guards anybody else besides Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm not worried about who Decker guards. I'm very worried about who Frank Kaminsky guards, especially, as you said, if it's Karl-Anthony Towns, because of foul trouble, but more because if I'm Wisconsin, I don't want Frank Kaminsky spending all of his energy trying to bump this load off the block. I don't want him engaging in that. I don't want to risk him getting an elbow to the face when Karl-Anthony Towns turns for his jump hook. I don't want Kaminsky to have any part of that. I want Kaminsky to come in on the weak side, get an offside rebound, and get an outlet and start a break. That's what I want Kaminsky doing. I totally agree with you when you talk about sliding in some maybe a little bit different post-style defensive matchups on Karl-Anthony Towns, because ultimately it comes down to this. You're not going to completely stop him, at least I don't think, because he's really kind of finding his groove, and I really do believe that Kentucky is starting to realize what they have in him when they just dump it into him on the block and say go. I really do believe that. But ultimately, I think someone like Nigel Hayes would be your best option because of this. Number one, he's quick enough to beat Karl-Anthony Towns down the floor, establish his position, and make Karl-Anthony Towns post up a little bit farther out than maybe he's comfortable with. Number two, if any time Karl-Anthony Towns puts the ball on the floor, Nigel Hayes is a guy that can get in there, scrap it, poke it away, maybe cause a turnover, or at least cause the ball to go back to the outside. If you decide to front him, he can get around it. On the weak side, when there's post-to-post screens, Nigel Hayes can get around that. Those are the matchups that I think really Wisconsin is going to have to rely on if they want to stop Karl-Anthony Towns. Because, you bring Dukan off the bench, and he can do some things for you, without a doubt. He's got the size. He's athletic on his feet. He can move around a little bit. But other than that, you don't have a whole lot of post defense that is, number one, strong enough, number two, quick enough, and smart enough to keep up with Karl-Anthony Towns on the block. This is going to be big for Kentucky. I said that I like the point guard matchup best for Wisconsin. This is my favorite matchup for Kentucky. This is a game where, honestly, Towns could have 25 again. I really do believe that. If Kentucky plays smart, they can dump it inside, because if Wisconsin doubles, you're kicking out to the Harrison Twins, Lyles for mid-range or three-point shots. If they play one-on-one, you're probably going to get somebody in foul trouble, or you're going to match up against Frank Kaminsky, a matchup that really favors you when you're the Wildcats. I'm fascinated to see what happens underneath.
Yeah, and looking back at the Notre Dame game, I mean, it's hard to fault Mike Bray because He coached an excellent game, definitely had his team prepared, drew up the perfect blueprint to beat Kentucky. But it was, I think Len Elmore mentioned this on the broadcast for CBS. It was really interesting that he leaves Zach August, who really had been their best offensive weapon all night. He leaves Zach August in charge of Karl Anthony Towns instead of putting in the other guy, Colson, who had been really playing well. I mean, offensively, he had been playing okay, had some big shots, but just a big body defensively. He never really went offense, defense, and, hindsight is 20/20. But it's very interesting. And then when you figure that into Kaminsky and Bo Ryan, if he's going to play Kaminsky against Karl Anthony Towns, that would be tough. So I agree. A lot of it is going to fall on Nigel Hayes. So will ultimately 5-point spread. Kentucky's 5-point favorites. Do you see this one being close, or do you like the favorite here?
I do think this one is going to be close. And I've said in the past when we talk about spreads that, I like a team to use their free throws to kind of beef up their lead late in the game. I do think that this is the potential of being a game where Kentucky shoots themselves out of the game from the free throw line late. Certainly. But you and I kind of talked off air a couple days ago, and with Notre Dame pushing Kentucky the way they did, I would not be surprised to see Kentucky come out with all the fire in their bellies, really everything clicking, and really put together their focus and execution more than they have all year, and take the title without much contention. It wouldn't surprise me to see that. But I also think Wisconsin, I think this is a talented team. I think it's a veteran team. It's so well coached. I do think they'll keep it close. I think it's going to be closer than the spread indicates. I would take Wisconsin there.
Wow, okay, Wisconsin underneath the 5. So now let's move on to the second Final Four game where Michigan State enters on an impressive streak of having beaten the 2, 3, and 4 seeds from their bracket. Tom Izzo said that of all 7 of his Final Four runs, this one has been the most satisfying in part because it was the most surprising. This is a team that lost to Nebraska, lost to Texas Southern at home, lost to Illinois, I believe. I mean, as far back as a month or a month and a half ago, it was a real question as to whether Michigan State would get into the tournament. Now they made the great run in the Big Ten tournament where they lost to Wisconsin in overtime in the final. And, of course, they've made this brilliant run here for yet another Final Four for Izzo. So, Will, in terms of matchups, let's start up top where Travis Trice and Denzel Valentine have really carried Michigan State throughout the tournament. But when going against Tyus Jones and Justice Winslow, among others, they're really going to have to play perfectly again for the Spartans to win. And we may touch on this later, but Trice, to me, has been one of the most improved players in the country this year, elevating his points per game to over 15 now that he's the guy. He's played absolutely brilliantly in this tournament. I would argue more so than any other player in the Final Four, Trice is the most important to his ball club. That without Trice, Michigan State goes nowhere. So when focusing on that veteran duo of Trice and Valentine, who also handles the ball a lot and a lot of plays go through, how do you ultimately think they'll fare, Will, against those perimeter guys for Duke?
Well, I really do believe that Travis Trice, as you said, is extremely dynamic, but he's susceptible to off nights. He's susceptible to kind of getting out of control. I mean, you look at his stat line against Louisville, he's only 3 of 10 from three-point line. He's 5 of 15 overall. But what he does do, again, he finds ways to affect the game. And so against Duke, he's probably going to have either Tyus Jones or Quinn Cook on him. I would think it would be Quinn Cook, just because Cook is so much better defensively than Tyus Jones. Quinn Cook can make life pretty tough on opposing guards. So Travis Trice may not have a big shooting game, a big scoring game, but he's going to have to find ways to affect the game in other ways with rebounding, getting his team out in the open floor, and assisting the ball, of course. But that's what's going to be really, to me, the matchup of this game is, can Trice deal with Cook on the offensive end in terms of Trice finding shots, finding teammates, and not getting out of control, not getting hassled by Cook. And then on the other end, can he make Cook a finisher in the lane? Because if you make Cook a finisher in the lane, I do believe that plays into your hands. You can't just let him sit outside and snipe, because he certainly can. But also, as you said, Valentin is going to be big in this game as well. You put a guy like Justice Winslow on him if you're Duke, because you've got to find ways to slow him down. But really, if I'm Michigan State, I almost put Denzel Valentin at the point guard spot. I really consider that, because that way you can start to run off guys like Trice. You can certainly start to run off guys. You could bring Marvin Clark, start to run him off screens. Brian Forbes, run those guys off the ball screens, so you don't let Cook and Tyus Jones just sit up top and kind of hound guys on the dribble and make setting up the offense difficult. Let Valentin bring the ball up the floor, run those guys off screens, tire out Cook, tire out Jones. That would be my game plan on the perimeter in terms of how I use my guards if I'm Tom Izzo.
Yeah, that could be an interesting move. Valentin is obviously very adept at bringing the ball up the court. You saw it a lot against Louisville in their pressure, even for a 6'5", kind of point forward guy. Very good ball handler. And I think that would play well for what Izzo wants to do. You get a shooter like Forbes rolling. You get a shooter like Trice, which is really what he can be best at, rolling out on the wing. That could be a very interesting move. Inside, Brandon Dawson, another senior leader for Michigan State, had a huge putback bucket late against Louisville. So him and Costello will likely split duty guarding Okafor. Though they're not as tall as Gonzaga's front line that Okafor just saw, Michigan State is very physical inside. So the question is, are they physical and athletic enough, though, to slow down Jahlil Okafor and also Justice Winslow when he crashes the boards? Well, what do you say for that matchup?
This is going to be tough. This really is. But at the same time, are you ever going to doubt a Tom Izzo team under the basket when it comes to rebounding? I mean, they're a top 50 rebounding team in the country. And more than that, this team, and you said Tom Izzo talked about how satisfying this was. This team has really taken on the personality of him in terms of, their big men aren't flashy by any stretch of the imagination. Matt Costello and Gavin Schilling, and even Brandon Dawson, are not shiny, flashy, are not stylish big men. They're probably not even that. I mean, they're skilled, sure, but they're not incredibly gifted when we're talking about basketball players. But they're athletic. They're extremely tough. And they don't care if you push them in the back. They don't care if you try to box them out. They'll throw an elbow in your jaw. They'll punch you in the throat. These guys are so unbelievably tough underneath. It's so fun to watch because in reality, Brandon Dawson is 6'6", and he's one of the best rebounders in the country. Costello and Schilling, neither of which bigger than 6'9", get in there and make life miserable for opposing forwards trying to make a living on the offensive glass. They come at you in waves in the sense of their motor, which is what this team is all about, in my opinion. It's all about motor, and they've all got it. They all know their role. They know what they do well. They know what they don't do well, and they don't get caught up in trying to prove a point. They're not going to go out against Duke and say, I'm going to be the guy single-handedly to stop Jahlil Okafor. I'm going to be the guy that holds him to single digits and has 15 rebounds. No, they're going to go in there and be like, okay, freshman, what do you got? Bring it. Because I'm going to punch it. I'm going to push it. I'm going to make life hell. And when the ball goes up, you're not getting an offensive rebound. And when we put the ball up, you better make damn sure you box me out because I'm headed to the glass with authority. That's what these forwards do. So I don't think Duke is going to have much of an advantage inside because of the approach that Michigan State takes and because of the instinct that they have when it comes to rebounding the ball.
Yeah, Michigan State is gritty, and for as gritty as Michigan State is, Duke is flashy, and Duke's got the NBA star power. Out of all the teams in the Final Four, it's probably Duke that has the best 1-2-3 punch with Tyus Jones, Justice Winslow, who's played maybe as well as anyone in this tournament, and Jahlil Okafor. So these are guys that have proven time and time again that they play well in big games. I mean, look at Tyus Jones' track record in big games. Look at what Justice Winslow's done in the tournament. So we've touched upon that Duke trio a bit. But, Will, I want to know who's a fourth guy for Duke that could step up in the Final Four. We saw Matt Jones knock down some big shots against the Zags. Could it be him again? You mentioned Quinn Cook defensively, Emil Jefferson. Who are you looking at as a fourth guy to step up here for Duke?
Yeah, I think Matt Jones is certainly going to be given the opportunity, without a doubt. His shooting really opens things up for this Duke team because while Quinn Cook and Tyus Jones can knock down outside shots, this isn't, when you start and play a guy like Justice Winslow as much as you do, you're not the same kind of Duke team as years past with shooting the ball. But I think the fourth guy, without a doubt, to me, that's going to have to step up is going to be Quinn Cook. You've got to win the guard matchup if you want to beat Michigan State. That's how you have to win the game. If you lose the guard matchup, you lose to Michigan State. Bottom line. I really do believe that. And so they're going to need Quinn Cook to be huge. But if I'm predicting a fourth guy to step up, I think, as you mentioned, Matt Jones coming off the bench, running off screens. If the Michigan State guards lose containment on Quinn Cook one time off the bounce, Tyus Jones one time off the bounce, they're going to find Matt Jones on the perimeter, and he's going to be able to knock down shots without a doubt.
For sure. And so Duke also listed as a 5-point favorite right now. That line really hasn't changed since it's come out. Where do you see this one? Do you like the favorite, Duke -5?
I do. I really do. I think Duke is the better team. And ultimately, I think sometimes at this stage of the game, it comes down to who has more guys that can knock down shots, who has more guys that you trust to make buckets, to grab the rebound, to maybe get that loose ball. And when Duke has Justice Winslow playing as well as he has recently, he turns this team into that flashy NBA-style team that you talked about, into one that also has the college dynamic, the motor dynamic, and is able to get those 50-50 balls. I expect Michigan State to be well prepared. I expect them to play really well. I think that they're going to be in a similar position as Gonzaga with about 4 minutes remaining, where they're right there, maybe just a bucket off. But that's when Duke goes into overdrive, and I do believe that Duke will cover the spread.
And especially, for the last game, you mentioned free throws. Michigan State free throws have been a problem all year. We didn't really see that improve at all in the tournament, even despite this run. So down the stretch, free throws could be very, very key. So you've got Duke in the one slot, and in the other slot you have Kentucky, although you're taking Wisconsin +5. Last week on the Sweet 16 show, Will, you said this is the final that the American people deserve. So ultimately, who is the champion? Are you going with Kentucky here?
I am. I do think Duke is a similar matchup for Kentucky as Notre Dame was, but with better forwards and one more better guard than Notre Dame has. I still think Jaren Grant would be the best guard on Duke's roster. But, of course, Duke has the forwards. They have wings that Notre Dame doesn't quite have. I think Duke is not a great matchup for Kentucky. I'd be fascinated to see where the spread is on that one. But I think, as I said earlier, once Notre Dame pushed Kentucky, I think Kentucky is going to step up in a way that they haven't yet this year. And I do believe that they will be champions.
And Final Four MVP. Who do you like for Final Four MVP?
Final Four MVP is going to be extremely fascinating, but I do think it'll be Karl Anthony Towns because of the offensive numbers that he'll put up. But I think the reason why Kentucky wins the national title will be Willie Cauley-Stein.
Okay. Yeah, no dissent from me, no disagreement on this side. I really do think it'll be Kentucky over Duke with Karl Anthony Towns as the MVP. Kentucky capping off a 40-0 season. But they play the games for a reason, so we shall see how the season ends up. And, well, lastly, since this will be our last show of the season, I want to get a quick recap of your, in general, favorite moments from the season, maybe a coach you think did the best job, a player that became your favorite to watch, a team that became your favorite to watch. Let's walk down memory lane here for a second. Give me a quick recap to end the season.
Yeah, I think coast to coast there were a ton of really great coaching jobs. I really believe that there were Bob Huggins at West Virginia, a team that was picked to finish 8th in the Big 12, really competed all year and makes a nice appearance in the Big Dance. But if I have to go with top coaching job from coast to coast, I really think that Chris Holtmann at Butler, who just got a really well-deserved extension last night, deserves a ton of credit. Obviously, he did not know he was going to be the full-time head coach this time last year and coming into this season, yet now his Butler Bulldogs finished near the top of the Big East. Really one of my favorite coaches in the NCAA basketball, coast to coast, without a doubt. One of the players that I didn't love coming into the season, but I came to love was TJ McConnell at Arizona. I can really appreciate a guy that doesn't have the physical tools, that isn't even the best shooter, isn't the best ball handler, may not even be the best passer. I can appreciate that guy whose competitive fire makes him such an intense matchup and such a key part of his team. And we usually see those guys lead the likes of Davidson. We see those guys lead the Butlers, Northwesterns. We don't see him at Arizona enough. We really don't. And we don't see him at big-time programs enough. Somebody that's willing to put away their ego, throw their entire being into that program. And TJ McConnell really did. And he's a fan favorite in Tucson for that reason. He was probably my favorite player to watch at season's end. And I'm going to say, if I had to choose my favorite game from this whole season, I really don't know where I'd start, and I don't know where I'd finish. The Duke at Notre Dame game was so much fun.
Yeah.
There was so much offense being played. It was a sight to see for basketball purists. It really was. That was probably my favorite game, but this year I felt like this year was extremely exciting. I really did. I thought there was tons. There wasn't a lot of great basketball being played, and I talked about that throughout the year. But this was an exciting season. I think there's work to be done on college basketball. But in terms of entertainment and storylines, this was really a great season. It's sad to see it coming to an end, but gosh darn it, it couldn't come to an end any better with these four teams, four of the best teams in the country, with four of probably the top 5 or 6 coaches in the country. We're all really in for a treat, and it's a fitting way to end this season, I think.
Very well said, my friend, and I as well am sad to see it come to an end. I'm sad that we're not going to be doing this anymore. We'll do some off-season shows, but not the regular weekly pace that we have been doing. But yes, very well put, very well put. And so there it is. We will be looking to see if Kentucky can make history on Saturday and then going into Monday in the championship game. You heard it here. And, well, you've probably heard it everywhere by now, but Kentucky, the national champion over Duke. Happy viewing, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this Final Four edition of the show. Take care.